Shoykat Chakrabarti, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So you have worn many hats over the years, sir. You were a co-founder of Justice Democrats, AOC's former chief of staff for quite a while. Now you're a congressional candidate running against Nancy Pelosi in the Democratic primary. Let me start with this. We know that gerontocracy is this big issue now. People are discussing it a lot. Nancy Pelosi is not only, I believe, 85 years old, but she's also known for raising a tremendous amount of money from billionaires and mega corporations. Why did you decide to run against her?
I mean, honestly, Trump just got elected, and I took the threat seriously. I took the whole thing the Democrats campaigned on seriously, that if Trump gets elected again, we might lose our democracy, because I really think that's happening. I really think that's happening. And then the Democrats just are responding with absolutely nothing. And I think it's this twofold problem. It's like, is this lack of actual fight, lack of any plan for what to do about an authoritarian threat. And then, as you know, Kyle, as we've been talking about for almost a decade now, there's been no plan for the actual economic vision for how to, win the country back. Because I really think we are in sort of the battle for defining what the next political era is going to be right now. I think we had sort of the New Deal era from FDR to about the 70s. We had the Reagan neoliberal era. From Reagan to about, I think with the Great Recession. I think when the Great Recession happened, that ended. And ever since then, people keep voting for change. So Obama campaigned on sweeping change, Trump campaigned on sweeping change. And, if the Democrats can't figure out how to define what that's going to be and actually enact it, I really worry we're going to end up in a authoritarian neo-fascist 40 years, where Democrats are going to have to, also preside under that sort of rule. And I don't think it just got, I feel like it's a do or die moment for the country. I think we have, maybe two elections left. Once the pendulum, maybe we win one election by the pendulum having a swing back left due to a backlash of Trump. But when it goes back to the right, we might really lose it, right? So.
Yeah. And what you're articulating is exactly what my fear was after Trump gets reelected. And in many ways, my fear has come to fruition of the way that establishment Democrats would respond by effectively capitulating to some aspects of Trumpism. And, you saw this really clearly with passing the Laken-Riley Act as one example. And in the same way that the Clinton era consolidates the neoliberal turn, I think we're very much in danger of Democrats deciding basically okay, we'll be the kinder, gentler, authoritarian fascist party. Now, I think the Democratic base is very much against that and is fighting back against that. And that, to me, is one of the most heartening things that we have seen in this era thus far.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that, they think it's politics as usual. They're so clearly not trying to oppose the current regime because they're just, they're hoping for this backlash that's going to happen to everything Trump's doing. They have all these tools they could use to fight back. They're not using them. And one of the things that got me to decide to run against Pelosi here is I heard her on Ezra Klein's podcast, and her, analysis of the whole election last time was the Democrats did nothing wrong. We did the best we could. And this is how politics goes. It goes back and forth.
Wow.
And there's a complete lack of awareness of the larger sort of just forces that are at play here that, why are people voting for change every single time? But I agree with you. The heartening thing through this campaign, the thing that's giving me some optimism is it's similar in a lot of ways to a lot of the campaigns I ran in 2018. It was a similar moment. Trump had just won. Democrats were upset at the party for losing that election. Democrats were looking for some sort of economic vision for how to move forward. And I think, in that moment, people like AOC were able to win by being the right candidate in the right moment. But the level of appetite for change I'm seeing right now completely dwarfs that. The kinds of folks that are showing up to my voter calls, it's normies. It's mainstream Democratic voters who, were totally the kinds of, I think the kinds of people who are so scared of, being part of a progressive project back in 2018. So I think this is a completely majoritarian movement now of actually trying to not just defeat authoritarianism, but really everyone's realizing we got to have something different. We got to have something new. I have so many lifelong Pelosi voters that show up on these calls, and they're saying, yeah, we respect her, we like her, but we need something else.
Interesting.
Yeah, we're seeing, to your point, AOC and Bernie have been breaking crowd size records from when Bernie ran for president, which to me is astonishing because now we're talking about we're in an off-election year. You wouldn't think he'd be breaking because his rallies in 2016 and 2020 were huge, and now we're dwarfing those rallies now. So I think that speaks exactly to your point. And to your point, Crystal, I remember when some centrist Democrats came out and said either to Politico or Axios, don't take the bait on Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Yeah. Which to me was like, my heart sank when I heard that because I'm going, this is the whole ballgame. This is just about basic constitutional rights and due process and habeas corpus. And you're saying, don't take the bait because this issue is vaguely related to immigration and you think Trump has an advantage on immigration? I thought that was absolutely crazy. And so I want to ask you, Shoykot, how would you be different from Pelosi and what would you focus on policy-wise?
I mean, I think the whole approach is different, right? I think, Pelosi is kind of this manager of decline is really how I see it. She's really someone who was, good at keeping the caucus together, but I saw how she operates in there. And she specifically doesn't believe we should have any sort of larger vision, national vision, a story to tell. The whole strategy was everybody runs their own race. You run on, potholes you filled in your district or whatever, which kind of sounds good in theory, but in the reality is the far right and MAGA are telling a story for why you can't get a job, why you can't afford a house. And, their story is America spent all this effort and too much time focusing on other people, focusing on immigrants and focusing on people in other countries, not enough time focusing on you. And I think we've got to actually combat that. And so one big way I'm different, I'd say, is I'm coming in with a real vision. I've been working on this project for what the national message and the story should be, and also what the plan should be for how to fix this stuff. How do you actually get out of economic decline and not just build up the social safety net, but build high-wage industries, build infrastructure, do the kind of drastic improvement in people's quality of lives that I think is the only way to defeat the far right, because that's how FDR did it. That's how in the 1930s, in the 1920s, there were these far right rallies filling Madison Square Garden with Nazis in America, right? And there was a real movement back then that had a real threat of taking power. And the only way to defeat that was to prove that liberal democracy was better, that we could actually deliver material good for people, and drastically improve people's lives through democracy. And that defeated that movement for decades. It was gone. It was completely wiped out. So that whole approach is different. But on policy, I mean, it's everything. I'm going to ban corporate stock trading when I go in there, right? I think a big reason we have Trump there in the first place is people have lost trust in our institutions. People think the Trump campaign on draining the swamp, and part of that's real. People really do feel like the system is rigged, the economy is rigged, the political system's rigged. We've got to call that out, and we actually need to clean house. And I think anti-corruption is the political layup staring Democrats in the face right now, because there's all these examples all around the world of these hugely corrupt administrations that get into power that get completely wiped out by some new party that runs on just anti-corruption. So I think in the short term, that's the real thing you run on, is you run on banning members of Congress from trading stock, you run on banning the revolving door between the Congress and the lobbying industry, you run on getting rid of money in politics. And these are huge, popular, bipartisan issues. You talk about, trying to do the David Shore style of politics. You should run on this stuff, right? And that's all things Pelosi, of course, would never touch. And I saw her actively get in the way of trying, people trying to take action on these issues.
Let's talk a little bit about your vision and how it interfaces with abundance. I was mentioning before, I thought you did a good job on the podcast with Ezra. And you're a particular challenge for the abundance people because you're one of the intellectual architects of the Green New Deal, which is all about building capacity. In fact, in some ways, I thought the beginning of the abundance book was a bit of a ripoff of the future vision of building out and making people's lives better that was laid out by the Green New Deal. And yet at the same time, you have a lot of parts of the abundance faction who would be very antithetical to your vision and your particular, direction for the Democratic Party and for the world. So talk about how you see those, the overlap and also the tensions there with the abundance crew.
Yeah, I want to talk about the book first, because honestly, when I read the book, I was kind of excited because I saw that, there's this utopian vision laid out in the first chapter, which was really similar to this video we did with Naomi Klein to kind of paint a picture of what a Green New Deal future would look like. And I was really excited to read that. And, he talks about, in the first few chapters, they talk about fully automated luxury communism, that book. And then they go on to give all these examples of times in our past when the government did great things. We mass-produced penicillin during World War II, all these examples that I love, And so, as you mentioned, the Green New Deal really was a product of talking about abundance. We wanted to build out abundant energy. We wanted to talk about abundant, high-wage jobs and building all this industry and infrastructure to actually drastically improve people's lives. I think the solutions in the book, and I think the book doesn't necessarily claim to have all the solutions, but I think it's a very small set of what we've got to do. They talk about things like zoning reform and streamlining permitting. Not bad stuff. I think it's all necessary. But I think in reality, if we actually want to create this future of abundance, it's not something new. Every country in the 20th century sort of went through these processes of drastically improving everybody's lives, creating these whole new economies that provided so much to everybody. And America did that through the New Deal in the World War II, but all Western Europe did that in the post-war boom. Asia did that through the 70s and 80s. And it never happened through these slow, piecemeal reforms. It always happened through these huge projects that really necessitated a muscular, powerful public sector, a really powerful government. It had this whole kind of leadership that was really driving the project and capturing national attention, making it exciting, doing what Trump's doing right now, but for good stuff, And these countries would make plans, they would execute these plans, they'd have all different kinds of institutions. So that's really what the focus of my work's been at New Consensus through this project called Mission for America. It's really kind of a follow-on to Green New Deal of how do you actually do that in America today. Now, I think where things have suddenly kind of gone awry have been this larger movement or political project that's kind of happening, I don't know, with the book or separate from the book, where what I'm hearing a lot of is sort of, just left bashing and union bashing and things like that, which makes no sense to me. Like the thing that was exciting about abundance was seeing that the moderates had come so far from where I had seen them when we were doing the Green New Deal. Because when we did the Green New Deal, the reaction was, this is too big, this is too fast, you're doing too much. Right. And then all of a sudden I read this utopian vision and I'm like, all right, great, we're on the same page. We're actually all talking about doing a lot, But then I see the answers coming out of Welcome Fest, and they're just, it's all slow, small bore stuff. It's not a serious project for getting to abundance. It's not, what FDR did. And I think if we're serious about abundance, we actually have to be serious about taking this huge, drastic, transformative approach to doing it, not just, doing some permitting reform.
Because let me say, and perhaps this comes from me reading the book at a time when some of this political discourse was already unfolding. But I do think there are some red flags in the book as well. Because if you were to articulate the story that's told in the book through this series of anecdotes, many of which focus on the difference between California and Texas, the narrative of the book is a bunch of liberal do-gooders put into place regulations that at the time were perhaps needed and certainly well-intentioned, but have outlived their usefulness and are causing problems. And if we just strip out of the way the environmental protections or the requirements that you have, clean air for people in public housing projects, and all of these things that were, again, put in place by the left, then we'll be able to unlock this future of abundance. Now, it doesn't say in there that corporations are never a problem. It doesn't say in there that, the ultimate villain is the left. It doesn't say in there we want to recreate, Reaganomics and just basically do neoliberalism 2.0. But that is the story that's really told in the book. And I think that this kind of came to the surface when Ezra went on with Jon Stewart and he told the story about internet service provider and how the rural broadband project in the Biden administration was stymied by all of these rules and regulations that he's blaming on the left. And then when the people involved, came out and were like, actually, the reason those pieces were in place were because of corporations who didn't want to compete with public broadband being provided, it sort of exposed to me some concerns about what this project was actually intended to do. And to me, those concerns have only been validated by the coalition that is formed around abundance. That is like,
bashing unions.
The Richie Torreses of the world. We watch Welcome Fest, which is like this abundance conference that's going on in DC this week. We see Josh Barro come out and say, the real problem, the real culprit here with all these regulations is unions. And so Ezra and Derek in the book are kind of notably careful to not throw any of the, the groups, the environmental groups or unions or whatever, specifically under the bus. And so you can kind of leave it to your imagination. But in practice, the people who are funding this, the people who are speaking at this conference, the politicians like, Alyssa Slotkin and Richie Torres, who are running to proclaim themselves abundance Democrats, in practice, what they really are interested in is not to yes and your project and, the Fight Oligarchy tour with abundance. It's to say, we don't need to examine the role of billionaires. We don't need to examine the role of corporations. We don't need to, examine the way that abundance has been blocked by entrenched corporate power. We need to make sure that that is not the direction that we go in, and we're instead going to offer this like rebranded neoliberalism over here and pretend like it's something new.
Yeah, no, I agree that some of those red flags were in the book. I mean, I'd say in the book, they don't really specifically say what they want to do or not do,
it's
right?
Very
They're
vague.
like,
yeah,
it's vague, and and sometimes they say things that I think are pointing in the right direction. Like they're like, oh, well, Europe is way more unionized than us, and yet they can build so much and so fast, right? And I think that's a great point to make. But like my view on it is just getting to the point where we're saying, oh, actually, we do need to talk about how to not just how do we do these slow reforms, but how do you actually massively increase production of stuff? How do you actually massively increase the quality of life for stuff? That's a good endpoint to come to. And the opportunity, I think, for us on the progressive side is to pitch the vision, the real vision for how to get there, right? Mm-hmm. And I agree with you that I don't like what I think is just kind of this factional war that's being used under the umbrella of abundance. This stuff like what's happening in Welcome Fest, people like Alyssa Slotkin and Richie Torres going up there and using this as, they're just kind of hanging their hat on this. I mean, Jared Polis, right? Like he came as like, I'm an abundance guy. And what's he doing? He's like vetoing surprise charges from ambulances.
Yeah, to make sure they can continue.
Make sure they can still do it.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
he's on the side.
Like nobody wants
make
that.
sure that there's abundance for, healthcare scoundrels.
Yeah, he's just like a libertarian Democrat, and that's the point. Your point is that at its worst, abundance is rebranded neoliberalism, right?
Yeah.
Some people, I agree that there are some people who take the yes and position.
Yeah.
Like, I'm good with anti-oligarchy and abundance. There are some people like that, but the heart of it really feels like rebranded neoliberalism.
But I think the exciting thing is the energy right now, because I think that what they're doing is politically stupid. I just don't think it's gonna go anywhere, because the energy right now is fighting oligarchy, right? Like look at the number of people coming out to these Bernie rallies and the AOC rallies. I think if you were politically smart, FDR was smart politically. He would campaign on the stuff that was exciting at the moment and then use it to do a bunch of stuff, because the reality is there isn't any single thing that's going to suddenly create abundance. If all we do is some permit reform, that's not just going to suddenly create abundance. And if all we did is topple the oligarchy, that'd be great, but it's still also not automatically going to create this world of plenty. It's this massive project and undertaking to do it, right? And my hope here is, instead of this just becoming like a factional fight, we take leadership on this stuff. We lean into what's politically popular right now on the progressive side, and we take power, and then we make it happen, right? And I think there's a real opportunity to do that because of where I see the energy in the Democratic Party base going, the kinds of folks showing up to these rallies, the kinds of people showing up to, my campaign voter calls. It's people, it's just interesting because, there's always this argument that happens amongst sort of the party elites, right? And we're part of the party elites, let's be honest, right? Like we're talking about like the people who are talking to the idea space. And then the way it filters down to actual people who are listening to this stuff, like I get so many people on the call who read the book and they're just like, this abundance future sounds exciting. And then I get to pitch them on how to actually get there because it's the stuff that's being talked about in Welcome Fest doesn't make sense as like how to do this completely transformative, different vision, right?
Such a mismatch, even in the book, such a mismatch between the first chapter which is very much, it is a takeoff on the videos you guys did for Green New Deal. And it is also a takeoff on the vision that's sketched out in Fully Automated Luxury Communists, the first chapter of that book as well, which also uses abundance language too. And they name check. And then, so that's like this grand vision. And then the specifics in the book are like, that's why
zoning
in
reform.
San Francisco,
Yeah.
we need to get rid of single staircase. Like,
Yeah,
it's like, what?
Yeah.
Or the air filter thing, so there's this vast gulf between the vision and the actual, to the extent there are concrete proposals in the book. But I mean, to your point, Shortcut, I think it's sort of revealing that they don't actually feel comfortable just coming out and saying this is a project that is at odds with the Fight Oligarchy tour. I mean, even the people who, are actively using it that way.
Yeah.
The strength of, the public, not just Democratic Party, but public consensus around, we got to check these oligarchs. This is out of control. Like, look at Elon Musk up there with the chainsaw, is so strong that at this point, you can't come out and actively, overtly address that or attack that. And I think that is I think that is interesting. That is different within the Democratic Party.
They really don't view billionaires as like the key boogeyman, though. That's the sense I get when I listen to Ezra and when I listen to Derek Thompson, is like, that is really not the core of their politics. That, it's the corruption, it's the money in politics, it's the billionaires, it's the multinational corporations. But I wanted to ask you, Shoykot, because I've been wrestling with this myself. So you worked on the Green New Deal, and I remember watching in real time as this was this like wonderful idea on the left that was gaining traction, and then the right decided to kick their propaganda machine into gear, and then they really did a number on it, and they put it through the ringer to the point where it felt like if you're a Democrat or a liberal or a leftist and you associated with the Green New Deal, there was almost like you have to come in defensive and try to explain yourself. What insight does that give you about like the right's ability to fight and effectively make the left run away from a good idea? Because my conclusion now is honestly not to meet people halfway and try to hold their hand and walk them through it. I want to like clobber them over the head with counter propaganda explaining, no, this Green New Deal is actually really good and we need it and it'll make your life better. Hey guys, you don't want to miss this week's episode of Crystal Kyle and Friends. We had on Shoykot Chakrabarti. He's a co-founder of Justice Democrats with yours truly. He's AOC's former chief of staff, and now he's a congressional candidate running against Nancy Pelosi. So he's got a lot of fascinating things to say on all the different issues. Like I said, you do not want to miss this. Sign up below on Substack for Crystal Kyle and Friends.